Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey, this is Ike. Boy, the dance card for this episode is totally filled. We have three really good segments. The first one is our continuing look at the Easier Way to Sell guidelines. And this week we're going to be talking about Think Like a Doctor. We're going to follow that up with the difficulty that most people have in being really quiet on an appointment. I'm talking about asking a question and then listening without the need or the feeling that you must respond. How do you do that? Well, we're going to cover that in the second segment. And in our final segment, I have a great conversation with a friend of mine from India. Her name is Shruti Kapoor, and Shruti is the CEO of Wingman. And what Wingman has done, and it fascinated me, is combine artificial intelligence with sales training so you can actually have real-time communication with artificial intelligence that is telling you it's time for you to ask a question. It's time for you to stop talking so much. Imagine what that would mean for a sales call if you had a wingman by your side to keep you going in the right direction. Stick around for this conversation that I have with Shruti. I think you'll find it as fascinating as I did. Okay, let's get right into the episode. In our examination of the Easier Way to Sell guidelines, we've come to the fourth guideline, and that fourth guideline is Think Like a Doctor. I look at Think Like a Doctor as almost more of a proverb than I do as a guideline. You know, the proverb, think like a doctor when you sell. But first, what is a proverb? Well, a proverb, from the Latin term proverbium, is a simple, concrete, traditional saying that expresses a perceived truth based on common sense or experience. Proverbs are often metaphorical and use formulaic language. Proverbs contain wisdom, truth, morals, and traditional views in a metaphorical, fixed, and memorizable form. This form is handed down from generation to generation, and collectively they form a genre of folklore. A proverb is a short, generally known sentence of the folk, such as, haste makes waste, a stitch in time saves nine, ignorance is bliss, you mustn't cry over spilled milk, you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar, and of course, think like a doctor when you sell. That's your takeaway. When you finish listening to this podcast, you'll think back and say, I learned a new proverb that applies to salespeople. If you Close the Deal Club members have your action guide available, you can follow along on page 30, and the title of the page should be Your New Sales Identity. I like to think of it as your new sales persona. I suggest that as of today, you begin to envision that this sales proverb we're discussing gives you an opportunity to create your new, authentic self as a doctor of salesology and effective communication. I can just hear you saying, there goes Ike, off on one of his tangents. He even made up a word to fit the conversation. What in heaven's name is salesology? Well, the best explanation, the best quick explanation is think of salesology as you would think of gemology. One studies the world of gems, whereas salesology studies the world of sales. Easy enough. Let's move on. Since you're a doctor of salesology, we need to look at what exactly goes into a sales call, and therefore we need to conduct an easier way to sell anatomy class. You're about to discover how the use of this anatomical construct can help you make the leap to an authentic doctor and patient style communication. This slight shift in how you communicate with your prospect will help you increase your business by 20 to 50% over the next 6 months. Now, the first stage is mindset. You must put yourself in the right frame of mind to cause an effective communication to occur. Now, if you've listened to the first 10 episodes of the podcast, which, from what I've been told, you would find most enlightening, you'll hear about the YES formula. Now, the 5 ingredients of the YES formula provide you with everything you need to turn your contacts into contracts more easily and more often, and one of those ingredients is referred to as CAN, C-A-N. These 3 letters signify the mindset necessary for effective selling. C stands for curious, A for authentic, and N for neutral. Like a doctor, you'll enter an appointment with the ability to remain curious, authentic, and neutral. And the ability to achieve this mindset is part of the training one experiences on the way to becoming an actual doctor. Achieving this mindset in sales takes a bit of practice because it's counterintuitive. You were taught to ABC, always be closing. You were taught to sell them what you had by closing early, closing hard, and closing often. If you're carrying around the memories of your past sales training when you enter an appointment, it'll take a real shift on your part to replace old-fashioned tips and techniques upon which you've come to rely with an agenda based on nothing more than the needs or problems of your prospect. Now, it might prove a challenge to remain in this authentic approach to communication because it's so backwards. For instance, where in your sales training have you been told that your first and only goal is to solve the problem facing the prospect? You were taught to sell. Rarely, if ever, were you taught that the needs of the prospect come first. And I can almost hear you saying, "The needs of the prospect come first. Don't you know I have a quota?" Well, it's even tougher to remain neutral about making a sale, especially when you believe you must. Remember, remaining neutral about a sale is different than not caring if you make a sale. Of course you want to make a sale. However, neutrality allows a doctor to come up with the best solution for a patient, and in our case, the best solution for our prospect. Another challenge to selling comes when you uncover the prospect's problem and realize that a solution might not include your product or service. But please remember, doctors refer patients to other doctors all of the time. When I first developed the easier way to sell, I used to suggest you stay curious, apart, and neutral, and I suggested staying apart because of the need to remain somewhat detached from the prospect's problem itself. Emotional involvement rather than authentic involvement produces a weird dynamic in any communication, and that's why I keep emphasizing stay neutral. Staying apart from the problem goes hand in hand with your neutrality. And over the years, I've substituted the word authentic for the word apart in CAN as a reminder of the importance of authentic communication. Staying apart from the problem is still of great importance, and I concluded that the neutrality aspect of curious, authentic, and neutral provides you with the reminder you need to remain apart. Once you're clear on your agenda, or in this case, your non-agenda, it's time for the diagnosis. It's at this point in the conversation that salespeople fall into a trap of giving information rather than getting it. Like a doctor, you've learned, or you should learn, to ask probing and clarifying questions. Your job is to probe, diagnose, over and over again with questions like, well, what seems to be the problem? Or when you came to see me, what were you hoping I might do for you? Doctors ask well-formed, open-ended questions, and when you ask doctor-style questions, you're more likely to get information that might otherwise remain unfound. A list of these doctor-style questions can be found on page 176 of the Close the Deal Without Selling Action Guide. And if you don't have your manual yet, I've made a list of these doctor-style open-ended questions available in the show notes in a previous podcast, maybe a year ago. These questions are the ticket to your sales effectiveness because these questions are your answers just waiting to be heard. After you ask your questions, though, shut down your response mechanism and really listen. Now, shutting down your response mechanism is the hardest thing for most humans to do because our tendency is to respond. Our tendency is to talk. When you get information, and you will avoid the urge to talk, just keep probing. Just keep asking open-ended questions from the standpoint of curiosity, authenticity, and neutrality. And most of all, listen to what's being said. Really listen. Avoid thinking of your next question. Train yourself to listen carefully. Effective listening will help you maintain your empathy and help you stay disassociated because you're remaining curious, authentic, and neutral. And you must think like a doctor in order to feel comfortable remaining in those mental positions. One additional thought: if doctors are looking for trouble, all they need to do is prescribe before they diagnose. But surprise, surprise, most salespeople are taught to prescribe before they diagnose, and your prescription comes in the form of your presentation and your list of perceived solutions. In most sales scenarios, your prescriptions are offered to your prospect before any diagnosis takes place at all. Think of it this way: your product has been given the highest award for effectiveness in solving a specific problem, and you're proud. You walk into a company and tout the details of this product and why the company should buy it without knowing whether or not they're experiencing the problems that your product resolves. How is that a good way to do business? It's like a doctor prescribing a drug that's been proven gloriously effective by the Food and Drug Administration, and you're sitting in front of a patient who may not even have that issue, but you prescribe it because it works. Now, that may seem pretty far-fetched, but think of someone coming in with a broken arm, and before the doctor examines them, the doctor says, "Well, I'm not sure what's wrong with you, but I'm going to give you a flu shot because these flu shots are amazingly effective." Now, that would be a time that the doctor should check and make sure that all premiums are up to date on their malpractice insurance. Salespeople don't have malpractice insurance. However, prescribing before you diagnose is as much malpractice as prescribing medications that may not be appropriate. So remember, think like a doctor when you sell. Remain curious, authentic, and neutral, and ask powerful, open-ended questions, and really listen. And of course, diagnose before you prescribe. In other words, think like a doctor when you sell. Well, there you have it. That's number 4 in the Easier Way to Sell set of guidelines. And in our next episode, we'll be dealing with the 5th guideline, which is be a problem solver. I'll put this out there. You may already think of yourself as a problem solver, but I challenge you to identify the problem that you solve in a way that doesn't include the solution you provide. Are you unhappy with your current sales results? Well, join the club. Join the Close the Deal Club and discover how to boost your sales results by 20 to 50% over the next 12 months. When you join the Close the Deal Club, you'll learn an effective, effortless, and easier way to sell. The Close the Deal Club is an online gathering where you'll join other sales professionals who are looking for a less pushy and happier way to sell. Join the club and turn your contacts into contracts more easily and more often. When the podcast is over, just go to closethedealwithoutselling.com and join the club. Author Stephen Covey says that most people don't listen with an intent to understand. Most people listen with an intent to reply. Do you ever really go silent when you listen? Here's an interesting tidbit. Listen and silent are spelled with the same letters. When you're listening, are you silent or are you just shutting up and waiting for your turn to talk? It appears that effective listeners have developed a skill muscle that helps them ask well-formed questions and then shut up during the answer. That's what it seems like, doesn't it? Well, that's not exactly accurate. Rather than what appears to be the ability to ask a question and shut up, effective listeners have the ability to ask a question and do something that is the complete opposite of shutting up. These listeners have learned how to shut down their response mechanism. It's a subtle change in communications behavior, and it's a major change in the journey to effective communication. All your communications actions are based on a stimulus followed by a response. Hearing and talking are a subset of this stimulus and response relationship. And your whole life, you've been conditioned to respond. Your whole life, you've been conditioned to have the right answers. Your whole life, you've probably worked on your ability to give information effectively. It would be a safe bet to say you're probably working on it right now, on delivering your message more effectively. You're on a quest to answer this question. How do I make my message more effective so people will trust me, like me, and buy from me? That's what you're thinking. I know it is. Your focus on giving information effectively may actually damage your communications effectiveness. What? You might say? I know. That makes no sense at all. How can working on giving information more effectively be detrimental to your communications productivity? Well, you've heard me say it before, and I'm going to say it again. Your job is to get information, not give it. It's difficult to not give information because that's the foundational structure of show and tell. In show and tell, your job is to give information. At least that's what you've come to believe. Stop giving information and start getting information. Shutting up is one way to stop giving information, but shutting up can be emotionally uncomfortable. Why is that, you ask? Well, the reason it's emotionally uncomfortable is because you have something important to say, and the effort it takes to avoid saying that feels uncomfortable. It's like the words are stuck in your throat, and you're not allowed to let them out. Just for a moment, imagine the path from your brain to your mouth when you shut up. You think of what you're going to say, you hear it in your mind, and that nerve impulse gets transmitted to your vocal folds, to your lungs, to your diaphragm, to your lips, and to your tongue, and even the position of your teeth is involved in forming the words that result in verbal communication. A river of data is leading from your brain to your mouth, and that signal is moving at the speed of thought. That signal is transmitted under high pressure until it flows freely. Now, when you shut up, you want to stop that free flow. When you stop that free flow, a problem occurs. For those old enough to remember the TV show called All in the Family, the lead character, Archie Bunker, used to tell his son-in-law to be quiet by telling him to stifle. I guess that's the way most of us try to be quiet, and that is to stifle the free flow of information from your brain to your mouth. Some have found a way to control the free flow of information, and discovering a way to reduce the pressure to speak has proven itself a valuable asset for the effective communicator. And here is a reasonable comparison that illustrates their solution. Have you ever watered your lawn or washed your car with a garden hose? Well, talking and giving information is basically turning that speech process into the equivalent of watering with a garden hose. Imagine the water in the garden hose is flowing at full speed and under considerable pressure, and you crimp the garden hose to stop the flow. What happens? Well, from the point of the crimp in the hose, the water stops flowing, but the pressure is still there, and the water is trying to force its way out because the water wants to come out. You can sense the pressure. You can feel the pressure. You hope the hose doesn't burst. Now, option 2, the best way to stop the pressure, shut down the water at the valve. What happens to the pressure in the hose? The pressure disappears. Shutting up stifles your response mechanism. Shutting down your response mechanism rather than stifling it gives you more freedom, reduces the pressure, and allows you to be more authentic in your listening. Shutting down the pressure to respond will be of benefit in all aspects of your communication. So avoid shutting up and remember to shut down.
Hello, listeners of the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast. I'm here with someone that I connected with nearly a year and a half ago, and we were both in early stages of developing what has turned out to be, if I might say, rather successful business ventures. And I'm delighted to introduce all of the listeners to the podcast to Shruti Kapoor, who comes from us from a long way away. So first of all, I want to thank Shruti for coming on the podcast and want to say a collective hello.
Hi, Ike. Hi, everyone there.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in a way that will be a logical pathway to where you are now?
Only if there were logical pathways to where we get in life.
That's that word, it's just not logical.
But yeah, to whatever extent I can put logic to where I've reached today. Of course, I grew up in India. I went to study at a very early age in Singapore when I was 16 and lived by myself there for almost a decade. And at the end of it, I decided that I was more interested in business than in technology. So I actually, did my undergrad working on cancer research, studying about biotechnology, but decided to switch fields into business. And then just out of business school, I joined Morgan Stanley as an investment banker, right? So that was a pretty significant jump as is from wanting to be a researcher, right? So not much of logic there. But then, as I went through that journey, I realized that I was, passionate both about, technology and analytics and, putting those two together. So I joined a fund called Intellectual Ventures that invests in very early stage technologies, like, literally university research on maybe a new coating that could, allow you to not have to clean your car for, a month. Right. So those kind of things, and worked there for 8 years. I was leading their India team at one point and helping bring some of these early stage technologies to the market. Through that journey, I realized I enjoyed being close to, kind of the foundational stuff, the starting up of some of these things. As I saw, some of these technologies go into startups or business ventures themselves, decided to maybe do that transition in what to me seemed like a logical thing to do, which was, since I had, spent almost a decade by that point in finance, I decided to join a fintech startup, right? Because that seemed like, finance and startup worlds coming together. So I joined them when they were just setting up their operations in a new market to help them figure out their go-to-market. And that's where I learned my ABC about sales. And through that journey, I realized there were things I maybe found challenging about sales, wanted to change about sales. And that led me to start up Wingman. I hope that answered your question, Ike.
does. And so that leads to the logical next question is tell us, first of all, what Wingman is and how it helps increase productivity for professional salespeople.
Absolutely. So Wingman, at the heart is a wingman for sales teams. And what it does today for sales teams is it provides them intelligence on what's happening in all of those customer conversations, right? And when you think about intelligence on customer conversations, you think about it in terms of trends and analytics and deep dives around what your reps are saying, right? Because that's what a lot of times sales leaders want to be able to do is understand how the reps are having those conversations. But it also is a really important window into the voice of customer, right? Because the rest of the organization is equally interested in hearing what the customers are saying, right? Because whether it's product or marketing, they could do so much more by knowing exactly how the customer talks, thinks, speaks.
Well, the meaning of your communication is the response that you get, and to be able to, monitor and measure that would be fascinating.
Exactly. And, very often when somebody else translates the words of the customer, they don't come out the same way, right? And, when you have something like Wingman, we also help you overcome that, right? So you get the frustrations, you get the excitement, all of that unbridled as you listen to the customer.
Well,
yourself.
I want to find out how anything about sales becomes unbridled in a good way. But first, I'd like to clarify for our listeners who may not be aware of the colloquial term wingman. And I know I have my definition. It's someone who stands by your side, whether on land, sea, air, or in a social setting, and keeps track of you and for the most part, assist you in having a safe journey from where you are to where you say you want to be. Is that fair?
That's a perfect definition.
Excellent. So how is it that you came to call the company Wingman? How are you a wingman for professional salespeople?
Absolutely. So, so I'll tell you why I decided to start Wingman, right? When I was in my previous role, I had a few frustrations from trying to get insights from CRM data, right? And it had nothing to do with the CRM per se, but the fact that you need sales reps to enter data into it for it to be any good. And so, kind of where my journey started as a sales manager, asking some of these questions, why are these deals not closing? How are we faring against a particular competitor? All of those answers were really hard to find in the CRM. So what I realized was that, if you could take away the sales rep from having to update this data, you would get two things. One is you would get better data, and two is you would get a happier sales rep who could do other things with their time. So, literally where I started was to say, listen, this is a problem, but today you have the technology to take these conversations, transcribe them, and, do a bunch of analytics on top of it without having to have a salesperson, translate those things and put them down. So that's where the journey started to say, can we help companies answer some of those questions? And of course, it evolved as we spoke to sales leaders. Today, what we do, and the reason why we call it Wingman, right, is we want to enable sales managers to help coach and lead their sales teams better. And I'll get into how in a minute, right? And we also want to enable sales reps to be able to have those conversations better, right? And so, which is why I call it like a wingman for the sales team, because we are not saying that we just want to help managers, do better sales pipeline forecasting, right? We are not saying that we want sales reps to be able to do better data entry, right? We want to kind of help the entire sales team and help them get to where they want to be. And every sales team wants to get to bigger revenue goals. And the way we enable that, right? So on the sales manager side, if you think of what their KPIs are and, how do they think about the problems that they have day to day, they of course want to, hit bigger targets. For them to hit bigger targets, they want to improve conversion rates. And for them to improve conversion rates, they want to, have their reps have better conversations with the customer, right? And and so that's where we come in, right? To say that how can we help the sales team have better conversations, and for managers to understand what is a good or a bad conversation. What are the trends in conversations that help close deals versus in conversations that lose deals, right? So today with Wingman, you can go into a dashboard and you can see, in all of the deals where I won the deal, this particular behavior happened 80% of the time, whereas if I lost the deal, this didn't happen, right? For example, one of the data that I looked at was customer pain points. Like there was a lot more discussion on customer pain points where the deals were won versus in cases where the deals were lost, right? Now, of course, it is obvious, but when you have data backing it, it becomes one, easier for the manager to drive home that point with the reps, because otherwise it's, my opinion versus yours. And two, it becomes easier for the manager to see whether if they've given that feedback to a rep, are they able to actually change that behavior? Because very often you have playbooks and you have reality, and those two don't match. So that's what it does for the sales managers. And for the sales reps, what it does is it becomes a great place where they can go because it has all of their conversations. It gives them insights into, how their peers are doing. They already know which peers are maybe doing better or worse than them. So they can pick up best practices on their own. They can track, they can set goals for themselves. They can track those. But the other unique thing about Wingman is it also enables them in real time. So as they are having the conversation with the customer, it can provide them, nudges like, hey, you've been speaking for too long, like I have been right now. And it can also, give them information, little nuggets that they need, right? So if suddenly a competitor comes up or somebody asks about a particular tech stack integration that maybe they don't know the details about, they can have that.
How soon do they become comfortable with the fact that there is actually a voice in their ear?
Yeah. So one is it's visual cues, right? So it's
well, I meant that more metaphor.
It depends. I think for newer reps, right, and newer in the sense they might be joining a new company or they might generally be new to sales, they find it really helpful because today what they might be doing as an alternative is they might actually have like the FAQ page of the company website open, and they might be searching for that information as they speak to the customer if they don't know something, right? Whereas the alternative in this case is that, hey, I don't need to do anything out of the ordinary. As I speak, something shows up and shows me the cue cards, right? And they can choose to ignore it. They can customize it. Different people might have different needs for what they remember and what they forget. So it's pretty easy.
So what I'm looking at least in my mind, is a virtual sales partner.
Exactly.
Is that accurate?
Exactly. It's like your virtual wing.
And that brings to mind that, well, first of all, I have a comment. I was wondering how often the managers find out that what they need to tell their reps is that you need to talk less and listen more, ask a good question and listen more. I'm wondering how those fit in terms of the hierarchy of what is being told to the reps by their managers.
I think it depends a little bit on, it varies from the team. So if I get your question right, you're saying, when I speak to managers, do they have a clear pecking order in terms of what they want to tell their reps?
Yes, exactly. What message do they want to get across? And which brings me, if I may, to the question of what two issues do you see in sales forces with the individuals that need the most attention according to data?
Yeah. So, okay. So to the first question, right? Very often there is, I think, some well accepted best practices that sales managers want, either to understand whether those are already happening or what is the adoption for those within the team, right? Now, these best practices, one is you can question whether or not the best practices themselves need to be challenged, and two is, what
Those
are
are the
some of
best
those?
practices.
So definitely, listening more, talking less is a very commonly quoted best practice, right? Now, what we discovered when we looked at the data was that if we look at different ranges of, talk to listen ratio, like we say, okay, 40 to 50% is great because you're talking less than the customer, 50 to 60% is maybe okay, but, whatever, right? So if I split it out like that, I actually don't see difference in close win rates across these categories, right? So the win rates for a call with high talk to listen ratio versus for a call with low talk to listen ratio, there's actually no difference. So then, you begin to question. So yeah, this is why I say that some of the best practices need to be maybe looked at a little bit more carefully. And it's not that, the data is telling you that you don't need to listen to your customer, right? What the data is saying is that you need to kind of maybe slice and dice these best practices to your context a little bit more, right? If I were to go and maybe dice this into saying, how does this vary for a discovery call versus a demo call versus a qualification, I might see some different patterns. And, similarly, by organizations, by type of sales process, all of those things will depend.
How many of the clients that you work with are actually working from a specific selling system versus having really good salespeople who are just out there doing their thing? Is there a balance between the two, and what do you recommend?
So we of course see a mix, right? And how embedded they are in the process also depends on the size of the team, and maybe that's a good proxy to look at, right? So for us, what we see is for teams that are larger than 5 people, they begin to have some semblance of a process. By the time there are like 20 plus salespeople, the process is much more well established. Very few of them actually use a single methodology, right? A lot of them actually use like kind of different methodologies that they bring together and, kind of define their own script or process or playbook. And so like, if you were to say, how does this data, what is the split within the data? I would say that, 70% plus of what we've looked at is definitely teams which are in the 10 plus sales team category, 10 plus sales reps, and which means that they have at least some semblance of a process. And then, of course, there are smaller teams which don't have maybe much of a process.
So when you say that, and is the process to non-process data that people who are good are just good and they're able to sell either way?
No. So I think there are
good.
also things that we've discovered that are really helpful from a process perspective, right? So one of the things that we discovered was something simple as setting an agenda, right, is super helpful in win rates. Now, sometimes when you have these star performers that move from one organization to another, it's very hard to kind of put them into a new process or a new playbook. Yes. Yeah, they feel that they are being, held back. And which is why, if the manager has data to back up whatever they're saying as a best practice, it becomes a much, much easier conversation.
Yeah.
And also it's not just about convincing someone that, this is a good thing for you to do, but then it's also easy for the manager and the person to know and be on the same page, whether or not that best practice is happening, right? Or whether that playbook is being adopted.
I look at close ratios and how few professional salespeople were really aware of their true close ratios, and how few closes you really need to be a top performer, and what the difference is between the performers that are doing okay and the performers that are doing great. However, when the people who are not doing as great look at the performers who are, they usually look at them and go, I wish I could sell the way they do. Yet when you seem to ask those people specifically, what is it that you do that has you be more effective than this group? And they go, I don't know. I'm just good. And that's been my finding. And for those people who are not as effective, it is so difficult to be good on purpose because they have no framework. These people might be, I don't know if there is such a thing as a natural born salesman, but that's what comes to mind. And people looking at them going, boy, if I could only sell that way. You can't. So it is my assessment, my observation that what you're providing that helps people maintain their outcome and move through the communications process, that just turns me on. I was curious, how has your business helped those who have faced disruption, either in the wake of the pandemic or the wake of standard business disruption? How has your business been of any assistance to that?
Sure. So of course, there are a few of our customers who were very badly impacted by the pandemic, right? People in like sports and hospitality industries and things like that. And I think at least a little bit that we did that we could do from ourselves was we wanted them to still be able to feel in touch with the team, to be able to still collaborate, and with everything being remote. So for some of those businesses that we knew got impacted because of the pandemic, we actually helped them with just letting them use the tool free for literally the end of the year. But
That's
then
great.
I think. Thank you. And then overall, what we saw was there was definitely a trend towards people feeling more isolated and more stressed when it came, especially to sales teams, right? And so the other thing that we did was we worked with our customers to help them understand what were some of the trends we were seeing in the sales calls through the pandemic, right? Like a month-on-month or a week-on-week analysis. And the idea there was because a lot of sales managers were suddenly jittery. They didn't know how the conversation with the customer and the context had changed, and they wanted to know that, right? And so what we were able to do was provide them pointers on, listen, this is where you should be focusing your energy. This is what you should be training your team on. Like, one of the things that everybody assumed was, listen, budgets are going to freeze. We are going to, have to train our reps on how to maybe offer discounts to overcome that challenge. But what we realized when we did the analysis was budgets, yes, they are a concern, but the bigger concern is timing, and you can't overcome that concern, right? And so you just need to kind of teach your reps to not be pushy rather than being pushy and trying to, give out a discount to close, right? Because
whose problem are you trying to solve? Yeah.
So that was the other thing that we were trying to do to help and support sales managers, because there's also otherwise sometimes a mistrust between the manager and the rep, right? And then the third piece of it was, just the isolation from teams going remote. So what we did was, we always had the ability for people to collaborate, leave comments, etc. But we've brought in even more collaboration features into the platform. People can leave comments. It'll send them a Slack notification to their manager. They can collaborate not just on the calls that they're having, but also on like all of the communication. So you can leave comments on the emails, and it brings all of the customer conversations into one
symbiotic sales call. I like that. I like that a lot. It's interesting you mentioned about what their teams are looking for to help them through these strange times. And one of my guests, and now a friend named Alex Goldfein, just wrote a book. And in that book, he talks about the missed opportunity of sales teams calling back their existing clients on basically a wellness checkup. And during that wellness checkup, just be able to say to them, it's interesting, of all the things we do, I don't know if you knew about this. And there's something that hadn't been promoted to them. And in most cases, they'll go, excuse me, no, I didn't know you did that. And he said, it's strange how effective it is. So our listeners know about my honoring Alex and his approaches, but I just like sharing it. I guess that's what the referral process is all about, huh?
Yeah, that's true.
So when it comes to AI, which is a good portion of the framework under which your system is built, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Where do you see AI and its future counterparts taking the sales industry over the next 10 years?
I like to often do
the ball. Come on.
Yeah. So one of the hints that we can take is from how has sales evolved in the B2C context, right? And then say, how will that be different for a business-to-business sale? If you think about the business-to-customer sale, it's really changed in the last 5 to 10 years with e-commerce coming in, with customers, being much more sure about what they want, what they're looking for, and the sales process largely being about educating and enabling them rather than maybe making them aware of a need that they didn't have, or creating urgency or those type of things, right? Like very often the sales person, and in B2C today, the salesperson doesn't even exist in a lot of those transactions, right? So I think for B2B, the question is, one, will the salesperson exist 10 years out, right? And the second is, and there are probably going to be situations where the salesperson will not exist in the B2B process either, right? We already see a lot of what people call product-led growth companies, which today still start out with, for smaller teams, not having a salesperson that needs to attend to them, but, bringing in a salesperson only for upselling or something like that. We might see that trend expand to a larger suite of products. But I think the other trend that we all solidly know is a sales intervention is going to come in much later in that buying journey, right?
Explain that. And I know here, but that term, I think that's the first time you used it, sales intervention. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So what I mean is that today, when I want to buy something, right, when do I first interact with a salesperson, right? That interaction point, I think, is just getting pushed later and later into the journey, right? So earlier, when I wanted to buy something, I would, suppose I wanted to buy a CRM, right? I would go and I would just say, okay, you know what are the CRMs that are out there? I would try and get in touch with a salesperson first, and I would use that as an opportunity to educate myself. Today, what I would do is, because there is so much information available, I would, go Google for the CRM. I would know all of their competitors. I would know how A is better than B, what are the different plans, trials, everything. I would probably know the feature comparisons. And then when I eventually speak to a salesperson, I'm probably looking for very specific questions to get answered, or which didn't get answered from the general literature, which are contextual to me, which means that my requirement from a salesperson is also higher. I probably want a salesperson who's much more of an expert, who is much more empathetic, who can get more into my use case. So I think that the role of the salesperson is going to change significantly as the buying journey and process change.
The technical customer service person talking to you about answering your questions and just making you feel comfortable that this product or service will solve your problem.
Yeah. Some of that is definitely that. And I think, one way to also think about it is how would you have thought about a car purchase 10 years back versus how do you think about it today, right? Like earlier, people would just walk into the showroom and then they would wait for the salesperson to tell them about the different cars, their features. But today, you do all of your research and you show up and say, listen, this is the car I want. I even know this is the best price that's available in this area for this car. Now just give it to me, right? So
things have changed. I know I'm in my 70s now, and I just have seen the craziest transformations from death of a salesman, Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross type salespeople, moving into the realm of the 21st century. And when they talk about, technological advances, I believe the technology of sales has to update itself in order to at least live in I'll use the word symbiotic relationship again with the ability to Google and do exactly what you were doing. And we need to be much more effective at solving problems rather than giving information. And that's the one coaching that I am looking forward to spreading around the world, is that I believe, and it's just my opinion, you must never educate a prospect. You must only educate your clients. Your job with a prospect is to get information, not give it, as you described, getting the pain points or finding out their problems and then having them convince you that what you supply to them will indeed get them from where they are to where they want to be. And that's not something that you can do by winging it, because none of us were really taught to ask the type of questions, the powerful doctor-style open-ended questions that get you to that point. And I'm curious, how has the sales process, as you've seen it over these last few years, shifted towards that doctor-style consultative selling rather than the demo presentation as soon as you walk in the door?
Unfortunately, it hasn't. It hasn't shifted as much as we would have liked it to. All right,
I'm so naive.
It's not uncommon for a sales manager to ask us, can the AI, either tell me, when did somebody start sharing their screen for a demo? Like, did they at least spend the first 5 minutes getting to know the person, or, were they sharing their screen and doing a demo in the second minute of the call, right? And we see that happen very often, right? And, going back to your previous question as well, right? Like, that's where AI can come in today, which is to maybe help people stay on track with being more inquisitive, asking more questions, right? So like some of the things. So some of the things that we do today, like, telling you that you've been on a long monologue, or reminding you to ask a question, or giving you stats on how many open-ended questions did you ask during this conversation, right? So that's where AI can come in and be kind of, the true mirror for yourself to say, listen, I wanted to improve on this, have I? But yeah, I think it's not changed fast enough when it comes to those things. And the reason why it's not changed is, I think maybe there is something to do with human nature. Everybody likes the sound of their own voice.
That was the sweetest cut I've ever heard. All you salespeople listening to this, you should stop what did they say? A person in love with themselves will have little competition. So think of that in terms of if you love hearing your voice, get them to talk, ask questions, really care about, be authentic. And yeah, I really would like to know. And if you can have a a wingman there to say, you're losing it, get back on track. Now let's, you know, you know, hush. That would be marvelous. What exactly, if anything, are you and the company promoting right now that our listeners might be able to tell others about, or maybe even use themselves?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's clicking for us right now is that Wingman is being super helpful for remote teams. And so, even if it's a team of like 3 or 4 sales reps, but you're no longer sitting around a single table, being able to overhear each other's conversations, Wingman is the way to go to kind of make sure that people are not feeling lonesome and you can still collaborate and get better. And yeah, we will give you that nudge to say, hush, you've been speaking for too long.
The new term for Wingman, we are your hush patrol. Yes. And
that's a good one.
And if people want to get in touch with you, would you please tell us the best way to get in touch with you? And I will also make that available.
Absolutely. I'm, of course, active on LinkedIn, which is where I met Ike. My name is Shruti Kapoor. You can look for me there. And if you would like to drop me an email, it is shruti@trywingman.com.
Excellent. And if anybody wants to find out about the company, is it wingman.com?
Trywingman.com.
I'm sorry, say one more time.
Trywingman.com.
Excellent. If there was one thing through your travels, through your training, through your company, that you would say, here is something that I would like to share with your listeners before we say goodbye, what would that be?
Listen more.
That was succinct. I guess I should have gone, what? Are you listening to me? What? Yes. Well, the idea that a service like yours exists is the perfect example of a problem solver. There are some out there who are listening who might say, I'm just fine on my own. And you know what? Not everybody is in everybody's marketplace. And if you're that effective where assistance at pretty much real time is something that you can do without, continue on. And if what you've heard today piques your interest as to the possibility of having a support in place that helps you with your language and your communication. That's what turned me on so much about this program, is that it's about being a more effective communicator as you are involved in the business of selling. So I want to say thank you as a fellow sales professional for making this available to the salespeople all over the world. And I think what we have in common is we're both trying to make the world a kinder and gentler place for salespeople. So I hope that works out. Shruti Kapoor.
And to make salespeople more likable.
More likable. Well, I believe that once salespeople realize, and I always get kind of a raised eyebrow look when I say this, people don't care what you do. They don't care how you do it. All they care about is what you can do for them. And if you authentically care as to whether or not they have an issue and are realistic and honest with yourself, saying, well, does my product or service really respond to that issue? And if not, shake hands and walk away, quit trying to sell to somebody when they've said no, and it's a real no. It's not a request for more information. And if you want to be more likable, listen. Listen. I'll leave you with this. There is an industry that is built upon people's need to be listened to and understood. And it is an industry that's not usually thought about as an industry where people go to be listened to and understood, but it's psychiatry, psychoanalysis. And you as a salesperson, if you can learn to really listen and find out the real needs of your prospects, you can be a wingman to wingman. That would be really good.
Absolutely.
Shruti, thank you so much. On behalf of all of the listeners of the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast, I want to tell you how enjoyable this has been, illuminating, and overall, a real hoot. It was fun. So once again, thank you.
Thanks, Ike.
Well, from a personal point of view, that episode was filled with a lot of good stuff. I hope you found it as helpful as it was intended to be. It's amazing. We're already at episode 56, and I want to acknowledge all of you who've been along for the entire journey. And for you new listeners, I would invite you to go back and start with episode 1 and find out what the easier way to sell is all about. I once again want to thank Shruti Kapoor from Wingman for taking the time out of her busy schedule and calling me all the way from India so that we could bring some interesting information your way. This is Ike Krieger. See you next time.